The crack of a whip echoed through the dusty main street of Black Hawk, Colorado, in the summer of 1873, bringing citizens to an abrupt halt as they went about their business. The sound sliced through the mountain air again, followed by a woman's cry that sent chills down the spine of every person within earshot. Dawson Reed had just dismounted his horse outside the general store when he heard a sound that cut through him like a knife, awakening memories he'd spent years trying to forget. Dawson had ridden into Black Hawk only moments before, his tall frame dusty from the trail, his dark hair tucked beneath a worn Stetson. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen too much but still maintained hope for something better. When he heard the commotion, his hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he followed the growing crowd toward the town square. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. A young woman, no older than 20, was tied to a post in the center of the square. Her dress hung in tatters, revealing welts forming across her back. Her honey blonde hair had fallen loose, partially concealing her face as she slumped forward. Behind her stood Jeremiah Blackwell, the wealthy mine owner whose reputation for cruelty was well known throughout the Colorado Territory. "This is what happens to those who steal from me," Blackwell shouted, raising the whip again. "Disobedience must be punished." Dawson pushed through the murmuring crowd, his eyes locked on the woman. Even in her battered state, he could see she was with child, her rounded belly visible beneath the torn fabric of her dress. "That's enough," Dawson said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Blackwell turned, the whip still raised in midair. "This isn't your concern, stranger. This woman is my property. She works in my house and stole from me." "I don't care what you think she did," Dawson replied, stepping between the man and the woman. "No man whips a woman in public, especially not one carrying a child." The crowd had fallen silent, watching the confrontation unfold. Blackwell's face darkened with fury as he assessed the newcomer. Dawson stood a head taller than the mine owner, his shoulders broad beneath his trail-worn coat. "You know who I am," Blackwell sputtered. "Don't much care," Dawson replied, his hand still resting on his holstered gun. "All I know is she's with me now." The woman raised her head slightly, revealing a face streaked with tears but marked by a determination that struck Dawson to his core. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, met his with a mixture of fear and hope. "You can't just take her," Blackwell protested, though he lowered the whip. "She's in my employ." "Not anymore," Dawson replied, drawing a knife from his belt and cutting the ropes that bound the woman to the post. As she collapsed forward, he caught her gently, supporting her weight against him. Any man who'd whip a pregnant woman deserves to lose her service. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Blackwell glanced around, realizing he was losing the public's support. "You'll regret this," Blackwell hissed, backing away. "No one crosses me in my town." Dawson ignored the threat, focusing instead on the trembling woman in his arms. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. She nodded weakly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's your name?" he asked, helping her stand. "Abigail," she replied. "Abigail Dixon." "I'm Dawson Reed," he said, removing his coat and placing it around her shoulders to cover her torn clothing. "Let's get you somewhere safe." As they moved slowly through the parting crowd, an older woman stepped forward, plump with gray-streaked hair pinned tightly in a bun. "Bring her to my place," the woman said. "I'm Martha Wilson. I run the boarding house at the end of the street. I've got a room where she can rest." Dawson nodded gratefully, supporting Abigail as they followed Martha. He could feel Blackwell's eyes burning into his back but didn't turn around. He had made an enemy today, but looking at the brave woman beside him, He knew he'd do it again in a heartbeat. The boarding house was a modest two-story building painted white, with green shutters framing the windows. Inside, it smelled of baking bread and coffee. Martha led them upstairs to a small but clean room at the end of the hall. "Set her down on the bed," Martha instructed. "I'll fetch some water and salve for her back." As the older woman left, Dawson helped Abigail sit on the edge of the bed. She winced in pain but managed to stay upright. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice stronger now that they were away from the crowd. "You don't know me." Dawson removed his hat, revealing dark hair with hints of premature gray at the temples. "No decent man would stand by and watch what was happening to you." Abigail studied him with those remarkable green eyes. There were plenty of decent men in that square who did nothing. "Then perhaps their definition of decency needs some adjustment," Dawson replied. Martha returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a jar of salve. "I'll tend to her now," she said firmly. "You wait downstairs, Mr. Reed." Dawson nodded, understanding the propriety of the situation. "I'll be right downstairs if you need anything, Miss Dixon." As he turned to leave, Abigail reached out and caught his hand. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes conveying what words could not. Downstairs, Dawson sat at Martha's kitchen table, a cup of strong coffee in front of him. His mind raced with questions. Who was Abigail Dixon? What had she actually done to incur Blackwell's wrath? And why did he feel so compelled to protect her? After about an hour, Martha came downstairs, wiping her hands on her apron. "How is she?" Dawson asked immediately. "She'll heal," Martha replied, sitting across from him. "The lashes weren't as deep as they could have been, thank the Lord, but she's exhausted and frightened." Martha leaned forward. "And that baby could come any day now from the look of her." Dawson nodded, taking this in. "Did she tell you anything about herself? About why Blackwell was punishing her?" Martha sighed heavily. "She was a housekeeper in Blackwell's mansion. Said she accidentally broke some valuable figurine while cleaning and he accused her of stealing it. When she protested her innocence, he called her disobedient and ordered this public punishment as an example. And the child's father, dead," Martha said flatly. "Mining accident 4 months ago. They weren't married yet, but had plans to be. Blackwell kept her on out of what he called charity, though it seems more like he wanted to make an example of her unfortunate situation." Dawson's jaw tightened. "Blackwell won't let this go. He'll come looking for her." "I suspect you're right," Martha agreed. "He's not a man who likes to lose face. What do you plan to do about it?" The question caught Dawson by surprise. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. Martha studied him carefully. "You said she's with you now. Those were your words in the square. Did you mean them?" Dawson considered this. He'd spoken in the heat of the moment, but there was something about Abigail that stirred protective instincts he thought long buried. "Yes, I meant them." "Then you'd better have a plan," Martha advised, rising to pour more coffee. "Because Jeremiah Blackwell runs this town, and he won't take kindly to a stranger interfering with what he considers his business." Dawson nodded slowly, thinking through his options. "I was passing through on my way to my brother's ranch near Denver. It's about 3 days' ride from here. She'd be safe there. Can she travel in her condition?" "It would be risky," Dawson acknowledged, "but staying here might be riskier." Their conversation was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs. Both turned to see Abigail making her way down, dressed in a simple blue dress that Martha must have provided. Her hair was neatly braided, and while her face was pale, she carried herself with dignity. "You shouldn't be up," Martha chided gently. "I heard you talking about me," Abigail said, approaching the table. "I want to be part of any decisions about my future." Dawson stood, pulling out a chair for her. "Of course. Please sit." Abigail lowered herself carefully, mindful of her injured back. "Mr. Reed, I appreciate what you did for me today, but I can't ask you to risk yourself further. Blackwell is dangerous. Call me Dawson," he insisted. "And I'm well aware of men like Blackwell. They thrive on fear and control." "He'll never let me stay in Black Hawk," Abigail said, her hand unconsciously moving to her swollen belly. "He's made it clear that unmarried mothers aren't welcome in his respectable town unless they're under his control." Dawson exchanged a glance with Martha before addressing Abigail again. "I have a brother with a ranch outside Denver. You'd be welcome there until you decide what you want to do next." Abigail's eyes widened. "You'd take me all the way to Denver. Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because I gave my word in that square that you're with me now," Dawson replied simply. "I don't give my word lightly." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha rose to answer it, returning moments later with a grim expression. "Sheriff Taylor is here," she announced. "He wants to speak with you both." Sheriff Taylor was a thin man with a bushy mustache and tired eyes. He entered the kitchen with his hat in his hands, nodding respectfully to everyone present. "Miss Dixon, Mr. Reed," he began, "I'm afraid I've got a problem on my hands. Mr. Blackwell has filed a formal complaint. He says you stole from him, Miss Dixon, and that you, Mr. Reed, interfered with lawful punishment." "There was nothing lawful about publicly whipping a pregnant woman," Dawson said firmly. "Be that as it may," the sheriff continued, "Blackwell has considerable influence here. He's demanding Miss Dixon be returned to his household to complete her contract of employment or face jail time for theft." "I didn't steal anything," Abigail protested. "I accidentally broke a figurine while dusting. It was an accident, not theft." Sheriff Taylor sighed, clearly uncomfortable with his position. "Look, I don't necessarily believe Blackwell's version of events, but my hands are tied. He's got signed statements from 2 of his household staff backing his claim." "Statements they were likely forced to sign," Martha interjected. "Possibly," the sheriff conceded, "but that doesn't change the legal situation." Dawson stood, drawing himself to his full height. "What if Miss Dixon were to leave town? Would Blackwell pursue charges?" The sheriff considered this. "He might try, but his influence diminishes considerably outside Black Hawk. If you were to leave tonight, I could probably delay any official action until morning." "That's hardly enough time," Martha protested. "The girl is injured and pregnant. It's the best I can offer," Sheriff Taylor said apologetically. "I'm sorry." After the sheriff left, the 3 sat in tense silence for a moment. "I need to go tonight," Abigail said quietly. "I won't put either of you in danger by staying." "You can't travel alone in your condition," Martha objected. "She won't be alone," Dawson stated firmly. "I'll take her to my brother's ranch as planned. We'll leave after nightfall." Abigail looked at him with uncertainty. "You barely know me. This could be dangerous for you." "I'm no stranger to danger, Miss Dixon," Dawson replied, "and I made you a promise." The next few hours were spent in hurried preparation. Martha packed food for their journey and gave Abigail a warm shawl and a change of clothes. Dawson went to the livery stable to prepare his horse and purchase a gentle mare for Abigail to ride. As dusk fell, they gathered behind the boarding house for their departure. Martha hugged Abigail tightly. "God be with you, child," the older woman said. "Write to me when you're settled." "I will," Abigail promised. "Thank you for everything." Dawson helped Abigail onto her horse, careful of her injured back. The pain medication Martha had given her would help for the first leg of their journey, but he knew the ride would be difficult for her. "We'll travel slowly," he assured her, "and stop frequently for rest." They set out under cover of darkness, taking a little-used trail that would lead them away from the main roads out of Black Hawk. The night was clear, with a half-moon providing just enough light to see the path ahead. As they rode side by side, Dawson glanced at Abigail's profile, illuminated by moonlight. There was a strength in her that impressed him, a quiet resilience that had nothing to do with physical power. "You never asked about my child's father," Abigail said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know," Dawson replied. Abigail was quiet for a moment. "His name was Thomas Miller. He was a miner in one of Blackwell's operations. We were to be married in the spring, but there was a cave-in 4 months ago." Her voice caught slightly. 8 men died that day. Thomas was one of them. "I'm sorry," Dawson said softly. "Blackwell offered me a position in his household after the funeral," she continued. "Said it was the Christian thing to do, offering employment to a woman in my situation. Now I wonder if he planned to make an example of me, all along the fallen woman carrying a child out of wedlock." "Men like Blackwell use power to control others," Dawson observed. "You defied that control by standing up for yourself." They rode in companionable silence for a while longer before Dawson suggested they stop to rest. He helped Abigail down from her horse and spread a blanket on the ground beneath a large pine tree. "We'll rest here for a couple of hours," he said, "then continue until dawn." Abigail lowered herself onto the blanket with a wince. "Tell me about your brother's ranch," she said, clearly trying to distract herself from the pain. Dawson sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Daniel has a modest spread about 20 miles outside Denver. Good water, decent grazing land. He raises cattle and horses, does well enough for himself and his family." "He has a family, wife named Sarah and 2 young boys," Dawson confirmed. "Good people. They'll welcome you." Abigail studied him in the moonlight. "And what about you, Dawson Reed? What's your story?" Dawson was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke. "I was a lawman for many years. U.S. Marshal, saw too much, did too many things I'm not proud of, decided to hang up the badge last year. And now I drift," he said simply. "Take odd jobs, help out my brother when he needs an extra hand." "Is that enough for you?" Abigail asked softly. Dawson looked at her, surprised by the perceptiveness of her question. "It has been so far," he answered honestly. "But I've been thinking lately it might be time to plant some roots." They rested until the moon was high overhead, then continued their journey. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Black Hawk, following a route that took them through rugged terrain where pursuit would be difficult. They made camp near a small stream, and Dawson insisted that Abigail sleep while he kept watch. Exhausted from the physical and emotional strain of the past 24 hours, she didn't protest. While she slept, Dawson tended the horses and kept a vigilant eye on their back trail. He had no illusions about Blackwell giving up easily. A man like that, humiliated in public, would seek revenge not just for legal reasons but to save face. When Abigail woke in the late afternoon, Dawson had prepared a simple meal of beans and jerky. She sat up slowly, grimacing at the pain in her back. "Let me check your wounds," Dawson said, approaching with the medical supplies Martha had provided. Abigail hesitated, then turned her back to him. "Thank you." With gentle hands, Dawson examined the welts through the back opening of her dress, careful to maintain her modesty. "They're starting to heal," he informed her. "No sign of infection." As he applied fresh salve to her injuries, Abigail spoke. "Why did you really help me, Dawson?" Most men would have walked away, especially knowing the trouble it would bring. Dawson's hands paused briefly before resuming their work. "I had a sister once," he said quietly. "Younger than me by 6 years. When I was away fighting in the war, she found herself in a situation not unlike yours, expecting a child, the father gone. The town where she lived treated her cruelly. His voice grew tight. By the time I returned, she was gone, died trying to birth the baby alone because no one would help her. Abigail turned to face him, her eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago," Dawson replied, though the pain in his eyes suggested otherwise. "But when I saw you tied to that post, I saw her. I couldn't walk away." Abigail reached out, placing her hand on his. "Then I'm doubly grateful. You've honored your sister's memory by helping me." Their eyes held for a long moment, a connection forming that neither had expected. Dawson cleared his throat and stood, breaking the spell. "We should eat and then get moving. I'd like to make a few more miles before nightfall." They traveled steadily for the next 2 days, stopping frequently for Abigail to rest. On the evening of the third day, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, Abigail suddenly gasped and clutched her belly. Dawson was at her side instantly. "What is it?" "The baby," she breathed, her face contorted in pain. "I think it's coming." Panic flashed briefly in Dawson's eyes before he mastered it. "How far apart are the pains?" "I don't know," Abigail admitted. "I've been feeling twinges all day, but this was the first strong one." Dawson helped her to sit against a tree trunk. "We're still a day's ride from my brother's ranch," he said, thinking quickly. "But there's a settlement about 2 hours from here. If we can make it there, we can find help." Abigail nodded, her face pale. "I can make it." They broke camp quickly, Dawson helping Abigail onto her horse before mounting his own. They set off at a gentle pace, with Dawson constantly checking on Abigail's condition. The contractions came more frequently as they rode, and Dawson could see the effort it took for her to remain upright in the saddle. By the time they reached the settlement, little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of cabins, Abigail was in active labor. Dawson rode directly to the trading post, his face grim with determination. The trading post was run by an elderly couple, the Johnsons. When they saw Abigail's condition, they immediately offered their back room. "My wife delivered most of the babies in these parts before we got a proper doctor," Mr. Johnson explained, helping Dawson carry Abigail inside. Mrs. Johnson, a small woman with kind eyes and capable hands, took charge immediately. "How far apart are the pains, child?" she asked Abigail. "Maybe 5 minutes," Abigail gasped, gripping Dawson's hand tightly as another contraction seized her. "Then we've no time to lose," Mrs. Johnson said briskly. "Mr. Reed, you wait outside. This is women's work now." Reluctantly, Dawson released Abigail's hand. "I'll be right outside if you need me," he promised. The next 4 hours were the longest of Dawson's life. He paced the small trading post, starting at every cry that came from the back room. Mr. Johnson eventually persuaded him to sit and offered him a cup of coffee laced with whiskey. "First baby?" the old man asked sympathetically. Dawson looked confused for a moment before realizing what the man was asking. "It's not, we're not," he stammered, then stopped. "Yes, first baby," he said simply, deciding the truth was too complicated to explain. Mr. Johnson nodded knowingly. "Always the hardest, waiting for the first one. Gets easier after that." Dawson didn't correct him, just sipped the strong coffee and continued to listen anxiously to the sounds coming from the back room. Finally, as dawn was breaking, a new sound filled the air, the lusty cry of a newborn. Dawson was on his feet instantly, moving toward the door before stopping himself. A few minutes later, Mrs. Johnson emerged, wiping her hands on her apron and smiling broadly. "You can go in now," she said. "Mother and son are doing just fine." Dawson entered the room cautiously. Abigail was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her face lighting up with a smile that took his breath away. "Dawson," she said softly. "Come meet Thomas Dawson Dixon." Touched beyond words that she had given her son his name, Dawson moved to the bedside. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's determined chin. "He's perfect," Dawson whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the infant's cheek. "Would you like to hold him?" Abigail asked. Before Dawson could respond, the door to the trading post burst open and raised voices could be heard from the main room. Dawson tensed, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. "Stay here," he instructed Abigail, moving to the door. In the main room, Dawson found Mr. Johnson arguing with two rough-looking men. They fell silent as he entered. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Dawson asked, his voice deceptively calm. "We're looking for a woman," one of the men said. "Blonde, pretty, expecting a baby. Traveling with a tall fella matching your description." "What business do you have with her?" Dawson asked. The man produced a piece of paper. "We're bounty hunters. Got a warrant for her arrest from Black Hawk. She's wanted for theft." Dawson's expression didn't change, but his mind raced. "Let me see the warrant." The man handed it over. It was legitimate, signed by a judge in Black Hawk, charging Abigail Dixon with theft of property valued at $50 and breach of employment contract. "I'm afraid you've had a wasted journey," Dawson said, handing the paper back. "There's no one here matching that description." The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we take a look around? There's a reward involved." "I mind very much," Dawson replied. "This is private property." Mr. Johnson stepped forward. "You heard the man. I don't allow strangers to go poking around my store without invitation." The tension in the room was palpable as the bounty hunters assessed their options. Finally, the leader shrugged. "We'll be staying in town overnight. If you happen to see the woman we're looking for, there might be something in it for you." "I'll keep that in mind," Dawson said evenly. After the men left, Dawson turned to Mr. Johnson. "We need to leave as soon as possible." "The young lady just had a baby," Mr. Johnson protested. "She can't travel yet. Those men will be back," Dawson explained, "and they won't be alone." Mr. Johnson considered this, then nodded. "I have a wagon you can use. We can make a bed in the back for the mother and child." By midday, they were ready to depart. The Johnsons had provided the wagon, food, and extra blankets, refusing payment beyond what Dawson had initially offered for their help with the birth. "The good Lord will provide our reward," Mrs. Johnson said firmly, pressing a small bundle of baby clothes into Abigail's hands. "You just take care of this little one." Dawson helped Abigail and the baby into the wagon, where he had created a comfortable bed with blankets and hay. He tied their horses to the back of the wagon, then climbed onto the driver's seat. "Are you comfortable?" he asked Abigail. "As comfortable as can be expected," she replied with a tired smile. "How far to your brother's ranch?" "About a day's journey at this pace," Dawson answered. "We'll take it slow." They set off, taking a different route than originally planned to avoid the bounty hunters. The day was warm but not uncomfortable, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. As they traveled, Abigail nursed her son and rested, while Dawson kept a vigilant watch for any sign of pursuit. They stopped briefly at midday for Dawson to check on Abigail and the baby and to water the horses. "You're good with him," Dawson observed as he watched Abigail tenderly wrap the baby after feeding him. "I helped deliver my sister's children," Abigail explained. 3 of them. "I learned a few things." "You have family somewhere?" Dawson asked, realizing how little he knew about her beyond the immediate circumstances. "My parents died when I was 16, Abigail replied. "My sister married and moved to California with her husband. We write occasionally, but I haven't seen her in 5 years." Dawson nodded, understanding the loneliness that underlay her words. My family scattered after the war. Daniel is the only one I keep in regular contact with." As evening approached, they made camp in a secluded spot near a small stream. Dawson built a fire and prepared a simple meal while Abigail tended to the baby. "What will you do?" Dawson asked as they sat beside the fire. "After we reach Daniel's ranch, I mean." Abigail looked down at her sleeping son. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some money saved, not much, but enough to perhaps start somewhere new, somewhere Thomas and I can build a life." Dawson was quiet for a moment. "You could stay," he suggested, his voice carefully neutral, "at the ranch. Daniel and Sarah could use help with the children, and there's plenty of room." Abigail studied his face in the firelight. "And where would you be?" "I've been thinking about that," Dawson said slowly. "I've been drifting for too long. Maybe it's time I found a place to call home." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. "We should get some rest," Abigail said finally. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Dawson nodded, banking the fire before helping Abigail back to her bed in the wagon. As he turned to leave, she caught his hand. "Thank you, Dawson," she said softly. "Not just for saving me, but for treating me with respect, for seeing me as a person, not just a woman in trouble." Dawson squeezed her hand gently. "Get some rest, Abigail." The next morning dawned clear and bright. They set out early, hoping to reach the ranch by late afternoon. As they traveled, Dawson told Abigail more about his brother and his family, painting a picture of the life that awaited them. "Daniel was always the steady one," Dawson explained. "Knew he wanted to ranch from the time he was a boy. Saved every penny, worked other men's land until he could buy his own. And his wife, Sarah, schoolteacher from Denver," Dawson replied. "Smart as a whip and twice as kind. She'll take to you right away, I expect." They were about 2 hours from the ranch when Dawson noticed a cloud of dust on the trail behind them. He squinted, trying to make out the riders. "Abigail," he called back to her, "we've got company." She sat up carefully, clutching the baby to her chest. "The bounty hunters." "Can't tell yet, but we should assume so," Dawson replied grimly. "Hold on. I'm going to try to pick up the pace." He urged the horses to a faster trot, but the wagon wasn't built for speed. The riders behind them were gaining rapidly. "There's a stand of trees up ahead," Dawson called to Abigail. "I'm going to try to reach it before they catch up." They made it to the trees just as the riders came within shouting distance. Dawson pulled the wagon into the shelter of the pines and jumped down, his gun drawn. "Stay in the wagon," he instructed Abigail. "Keep your head down." There were 4 riders, the 2 bounty hunters from the settlement and 2 men Dawson didn't recognize. They reined in their horses at the edge of the trees, clearly wary of riding into potential ambush. "That's far enough," Dawson called out. "State your business." "You know our business, Reed," one of the bounty hunters replied. "We want the woman. Blackwell's doubled the reward." "There's no reward worth dying for," Dawson warned, "and that's what will happen if you come any closer." The men exchanged glances, assessing the situation. 4 against 1 were good odds, but Dawson's reputation as a former marshal preceded him. "Look, Reed," the leader said, attempting a more reasonable tone. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Blackwell just wants what's his. The woman broke the law." "She's not going back to Black Hawk," Dawson stated firmly. "Not today, not ever. You tell Blackwell he can take his warrant and burn it." One of the new men, younger and more impulsive than the others, moved his horse forward. "We're taking her, Marshal. Ex-Marshal, I mean." His hand moved toward his gun, but Dawson was faster. The shot cracked through the air, and the man cried out as the bullet grazed his arm. "Next one won't miss," Dawson promised. "Now ride away while you still can." The injured man clutched his bleeding arm, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You'll pay for that." "Not today, he won't." came a new voice from behind the bounty hunters. The men whirled to find themselves facing 3 armed riders who had approached silently from the east. "Daniel," Dawson called, recognizing his brother instantly. "Your timing is impeccable." Daniel Reed was a slightly shorter version of his brother, with the same dark hair but a fuller beard. The men flanking him were clearly ranch hands, both armed and looking more than capable. "Heard there was trouble brewing," Daniel said conversationally, his rifle pointed steadily at the bounty hunters. "Thought I'd ride out to meet you." Outmaneuvered and outgunned, the bounty hunters recognized defeat. "This isn't over, Reed," the leader called as they backed their horses away. "Yes, it is," Daniel replied. "You're on Reed land now, and we don't take kindly to trespassers, especially those threatening family." After the bounty hunters had ridden off, Daniel approached the wagon, his expression softening as he saw Abigail and the baby. "You must be Abigail," he said, tipping his hat. "Dawson sent word with a passing rider yesterday, said you were in need of sanctuary." "Thank you for coming," Abigail replied, relief evident in her voice, "and for offering us shelter. Any friend of Dawson's is family to us," Daniel assured her. "Now let's get you to the ranch." Sarah's beside herself with excitement about the baby. The Reed Ranch was everything Dawson had described: a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, surrounded by well-kept-out buildings and corrals. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Behind her were 2 boys, aged about 7 and 5, bouncing with excitement. Sarah Reed was a slender woman with auburn hair and a warm smile that immediately put Abigail at ease. She hurried to the wagon as it came to a stop, reaching up to help Abigail down. "You poor dear," Sarah exclaimed, taking in Abigail's exhausted appearance. "Coming all this way with a newborn. Let's get you inside and comfortable right away." The next few days passed in a blur of rest and recovery for Abigail. The Reed family welcomed her as one of their own, with Sarah fussing over her and the baby, and the boys fascinated by their new cousin. Dawson kept a respectful distance, helping his brother with ranch work during the day but joining the family for meals and quiet evenings on the porch. He watched as Abigail gradually regained her strength, as the shadows left her eyes, and as she began to laugh more freely. One evening, about 2 weeks after their arrival, Dawson found Abigail sitting alone on the porch swing, the baby sleeping in a basket beside her. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "May I join you?" Dawson asked, gesturing to the empty space beside her. "Of course," Abigail replied, moving slightly to make room. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I received a letter today," Abigail said finally. "From Sheriff Taylor in Black Hawk." Dawson turned to her in surprise. "How did he know where to find you?" "Martha must have told him," Abigail explained. "The letter was addressed to both of us, actually." "What did it say?" "Blackwell's dead," Abigail said simply. "Suffered a stroke 3 days after we left. The warrant against me has been dropped. The new mine manager reviewed the case and determined there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it." Dawson absorbed this news. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved," Abigail admitted. "But not vindicated exactly. His death doesn't undo what he did to me or to others." "No," Dawson agreed. "But it means you're free to choose your future without looking over your shoulder." Abigail nodded, her gaze moving to her sleeping son. "I've been thinking about that, about our future." "And," Dawson prompted gently. "Sarah has asked me to stay on," Abigail said, "to help with the children and the household. She says there's a small cabin near the main house that could be fixed up for Thomas and me. Is that what you want?" Dawson asked, his heart beating a little faster. Abigail turned to face him fully. "That depends," she said softly. "On what? On whether you're staying too." The question hung between them, filled with possibilities neither had dared voice until now. "I've been thinking about that as well," Dawson admitted. "Daniel has offered me a partnership in the ranch, said it's high time I settled down." "And what do you think about that?" Dawson reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "I think I'd like to settle down, Abigail. But not just anywhere, and not just for any reason." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet his gaze. "What reason would be compelling enough?" "Love would be," Dawson said simply. "I know it's soon we've known each other only a short time under extraordinary circumstances. But I can't deny what I feel when I'm with you. You're the bravest, strongest woman I've ever met, and I'd be honored if you'd consider a future with me." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. "I've been afraid to hope," she whispered. "Afraid that what I was feeling was just gratitude, or that you were helping me out of obligation." "What are you feeling?" Dawson asked, his voice rough with emotion. "That I'm falling in love with you," Abigail answered honestly. "That when I think about the future, I can't imagine it without you in it." Dawson's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "Then stay," he urged. "Stay and let's build that future together. Not because you need protection or because I feel obligated, but because we choose each other." Abigail leaned into his touch. "What about Thomas? He's not your son." "He could be," Dawson said without hesitation. "If you'll let me, I'd be proud to raise him as my own. To give him my name and teach him to be a good man, like his first father would have wanted." Baby Thomas stirred in his basket, making small snuffling sounds. Abigail reached down to adjust his blanket, and Dawson watched the tender gesture with a heart full of love for them both. "Yes," Abigail said, looking back up at Dawson with shining eyes. "Yes, I'll stay. We'll stay." Dawson's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Abigail responded with a sweetness that made his heart soar. When they parted, both were smiling. Dawson put his arm around her shoulders and Abigail leaned against him, fitting perfectly at his side as they watched the night sky fill with stars. "There will be talk," Abigail warned. "A widow with a newborn courting so soon after her loss." "Let them talk," Dawson replied. "We know the truth of our hearts." The sound of the screen door opening made them both look up. Daniel stood there, taking in the scene with a knowing smile. "Sarah sent me to call you in for pie," he said, "but I can tell her you're otherwise engaged." Dawson chuckled. "Tell her we'll be right in." After Daniel disappeared back into the house, Dawson stood and offered his hand to Abigail. "Shall we go in?" As a family, Abigail placed her hand in his, then picked up the basket with her sleeping son. "As a family," she agreed. The months that followed were busy ones for the newly formed family. Dawson and Daniel worked together to renovate the small cabin near the main house, turning it into a cozy home for Dawson, Abigail, and Thomas. Sarah taught Abigail the ins and outs of ranch life, while Abigail shared her knowledge of cooking and sewing. Baby Thomas thrived under the care of his mother and his adoring adoptive father. Dawson spent every spare moment with the boy, marveling at each new development: the first smile, the first attempt to roll over, the first time he reached for Dawson with chubby arms. By late autumn, the cabin was ready, and plans were made for a wedding. It would be a simple ceremony, performed by the traveling preacher who visited the nearby settlements every few months. On a crisp November morning, with the aspen trees gleaming gold against the blue Colorado sky, Abigail Dixon became Abigail Reed. The ceremony took place on the porch of the main house, with Daniel and Sarah as witnesses, and the children, including 5-month-old Thomas, watching with varying degrees of interest. "I take you, Abigail, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Dawson vowed, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "To love and to cherish through all the days of our lives." "I take you, Dawson, to be my lawfully wedded husband," Abigail responded, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "To love and to cherish through all the days of our lives." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson cupped Abigail's face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes of his love and commitment. That evening, after a celebratory dinner with the family, Dawson carried his bride over the threshold of their new home. Thomas was staying with Sarah and Daniel for the night, giving the newlyweds time alone together. "Are you happy, Mrs. Reed?" Dawson asked as he set Abigail down in the middle of their new home. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, reaching up to trace the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "When I think of where I was 6 months ago and where I am now." "Life can change in an instant," Dawson said, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes, if we're very lucky, for the better." Later that night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Abigail rested her head on Dawson's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thanked you properly," she said softly. "For what?" "For stopping the lash that day. For saying I was with you now. You didn't know me, but you risked everything for me." Dawson's arms tightened around her. "I didn't know then that I was also saving myself," he admitted. "That in helping you, I would find everything I never knew I was looking for." The winter passed in a cocoon of domestic happiness. The cabin was snug against the Colorado cold, with a fire always burning in the hearth. Thomas grew stronger and more animated each day, his dark eyes taking in everything around him with intelligence and curiosity. Dawson took to fatherhood with a natural ease that surprised even him. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, tell him stories as he rocked him to sleep, and make plans for teaching him to ride and rope when he was older. Abigail watched the bond growing between her husband and son with a heart full of gratitude. The loss of Thomas's birth father would always be a sorrow, but in Dawson, her son had found a father who would love and guide him throughout his life. Spring came to the Colorado highlands with a burst of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. On a warm May morning, almost a year after their dramatic meeting in Black Hawk, Abigail approached Dawson as he worked mending a fence near the house. "Dawson," she called, a special light in her eyes as she walked toward him, Thomas on her hip. "I have something to tell you." Dawson set down his tools, wiping his hands on his trousers as he turned to his wife and son. "What is it, love?" "Thomas is going to be a big brother," Abigail said, her smile radiant. "Come November if all goes well." Dawson stood frozen for a moment, processing her words. Then with a whoop of joy, he swept her and Thomas into his arms, spinning them around carefully. "A baby," he breathed, setting them down and placing a hand reverently on Abigail's still flat stomach. Our baby," Abigail confirmed, covering his hand with hers. "Another Reed to add to the family." That evening, as the extended Reed family gathered for dinner at the main house to celebrate the news, Dawson found himself watching Abigail as she laughed with Sarah, the glow of pregnancy already enhancing her natural beauty. Daniel approached, handing his brother a glass of whiskey. "To new beginnings," he toasted quietly. "To new beginnings," Dawson echoed, clinking his glass against his brother's. "You know," Daniel said thoughtfully, "when you rode into town that day last summer, I never would have guessed you'd be settled with a family less than a year later." Dawson chuckled. "Neither would I." "It suits you," Daniel observed. "Fatherhood, marriage. You seem at peace in a way I've never seen before." "I am," Dawson acknowledged, his gaze still on Abigail. "For the first time since before the war, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As if feeling his gaze, Abigail looked up and met his eyes across the room. The love that passed between them in that silent exchange was palpable, a tangible force that had transformed both their lives. Later that night, after tucking Thomas into his crib, Dawson and Abigail stood on the porch of their cabin, looking up at the star-filled sky. Dawson stood behind Abigail, his arms wrapped around her, his hands resting protectively over the new life growing within her. "What are you thinking?" Abigail asked, leaning back against his solid strength. "I'm thinking about that day in Black Hawk," Dawson replied honestly, "about how one moment of decision changed everything." "For both of us," Abigail agreed, "if you hadn't been there." "But I was," Dawson said firmly, turning her in his arms to face him. "And I always will be, Abigail. For you, for Thomas, for this new baby, and for any others that might come along. That's my promise to you." Abigail reached up, framing his face with her hands. "And I'll always be with you," Dawson Reed. "That's my promise to you." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, both knew that the journey that had begun in violence and fear had led them to a place of profound love and belonging. From the ashes of their separate sorrows, they had built a life together, a life that would continue to grow and flourish in the years to come. The November winds were howling outside when Abigail went into labor with their second child. Unlike Thomas's hurried birth in a trading post, this time she was surrounded by family. Sarah and the local midwife attended her while Dawson paced anxiously outside with Thomas in his arms, telling the boy stories to distract them both from the sounds coming from the bedroom. After 6 hours of labor, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Abigail gave birth to a daughter with a shock of dark hair and her father's determined chin. "Come meet your daughter," the midwife called to Dawson, who entered the room with Thomas still in his arms. Abigail sat propped up in bed, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled against her chest. Dawson approached reverently, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Just like her mother. What shall we name her?" Abigail asked, looking up at her husband with love. "How about Emma?" Dawson suggested. "After my mother." "Emma Reed," Abigail tested the name. "It's perfect. Thomas and Emma Reed." Thomas, now 15 months old and curious about everything, peered at his new sister with wide eyes. "Baby?" he asked, one of the few words in his growing vocabulary. "Yes, Thomas," Dawson confirmed, kissing the top of his son's head. "Your baby sister." As they sat together, the four of them forming a complete circle of love and family, Dawson felt a sense of rightness so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. From the moment he had interrupted that public whipping in Black Hawk, declaring, "She's with me now," his life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. Looking at his wife and children, Dawson knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true purpose not in upholding the law as a marshal, but in loving and protecting this family that fate had brought into his life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Colorado highlands in pristine white. Inside the cozy cabin, warmed by the hearth fire and the love they shared, the Reed family welcomed their newest member and looked toward a future filled with promise. Abigail caught Dawson's eye over the heads of their children, a silent message of love and gratitude passing between them. They both knew that their story, which had begun in cruelty and rescue, had transformed into something beautiful and enduring. In the years that followed, the Reed family continued to grow and thrive. Dawson and Daniel expanded the ranch operations, breeding some of the finest horses in Colorado territory. Abigail, with her natural talent for business, started keeping the ranch books and eventually began a small side business selling handcrafted quilts and clothing in Denver. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, responsible young man with his mother's compassion and his adoptive father's steady strength. Emma developed into a spirited girl with a natural affinity for horses and the open range. 2 years after Emma's birth, they welcomed another son, James, completing their family. The story of how Dawson and Abigail met became a family legend, told and retold on special occasions, though with details appropriate to the ages of the listeners. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most difficult moments in life can lead to the greatest blessings, that courage in the face of cruelty can change not just one life but many. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Dawson and Abigail would sometimes sit together on the porch of their home, no longer the small cabin but a larger house they had built as their family grew, and look up at the stars, their hands intertwined, their hearts still as connected as they had been on that fateful day when a former marshal had stepped between a whip and a vulnerable woman, changing both their destinies forever. "She's with me now," Dawson had declared that day in Black Hawk. Neither of them could have known then how profound and permanent that declaration would become, a promise fulfilled through years of love, challenge, growth, and unwavering commitment to the family they had built together from the most unlikely of beginnings.